Conflictul armat din Ucraina continuă în ciuda armistițiului semnat la Minsk în septembrie anul trecut și a sancțiunilor economice care au îngenunchiat rubla rusească. Potrivit șefului diplomației suedeze, Carl Bildt, Moscova dorește mai degrabă să își întărească poziția din Donbass decât să își retragă sprijinul pentru rebeli. Care este strategia Uniunii Europene pe mai departe în relația sa cu Ucraina și Rusia? L-am întrebat pe Andrej Plenković, președintele Delegației la Comisia de cooperare interparlamentară dintre Uniunea Europeană și Ucraina. Mr. Plenković, thank you so much for joining our program. You are representing here Croatia, the youngest EU member states here within the European Parliament. And my first question to you would be whether you agree with the experts who are saying that within the Europe we have actually two Europes. We have the bloc of the oldest and richest countries, and we have the other bloc of the youngest members, which are not very powerful. Do you see this matter with the same eyes?
Well, as a newcomer, I have to admit that having been only in the Union now for a year and a half, we are still not only as the MEPs, but also the government, the entire society, trying to fully grasp the membership of Croatia in the European Union. And it is natural that our position is not comparable to the founding member states nor to the financially strongest member states who contribute to the budget. You know that basically 9 to 10 countries contribute to 80% of the European budget. But nevertheless, we adhere to the same values. We respect the same body of law, the European Union acquis, and we share the same policies. So this is what is important, and of course each country and each parliamentarian needs to profile himself and position the country and its interest in the most appropriate manner.
You are chairing the EU Ukraine delegation, one of the most important delegation these days within the context of this conflict at the eastern border of the EU, so to say. And I would ask you, regarding this conflict, how do you see the fact that we still have a conflict there? Despite the ceasefire, despite the EU sanctions, we still have a conflict.
Well, there are many similarities between what we are witnessing over last year in Ukraine to the situation that my country was subject to in 1991. Croatians and Ukrainians are two very friendly nations. Ukraine was the third country that internationally recognized Croatia back in 1991. At the time, it was the first member of the United Nations who recognized us, and we highly appreciate that. That's why Croatian Parliament was one of the first ones to ratify the association agreement between European Union and Ukraine in December. The hybrid war which we are witnessing in Ukraine, and that is to say the aggression of Russia, which manipulated, backed and supported the minority in order to occupy part of eastern regions of Donetsk and Lugansk, the Donbass part, as well as illegally annexed Crimea, is the most serious concern for security in Europe and one of the most important global crisis challenges. It is true that the peace plan from Minsk was the key document on which calming down of the situation, desescalation and the ceasefire should be respected. However, we have seen that since September, over 1,000 people were killed, and that is a signal that it was not fully respected. It is in the interest of Ukraine, in the interest of the European Union, but also in the interest of Russia to immediately cease the hostilities, to establish peace and to peacefully reintegrate currently occupied territories. This is the line which I think is the most important, because I know that in our homeland war 15,000 people died. So many thousands of people were injured. It took us 7 years to peacefully reintegrate Eastern Slavonia. It has been more than $30 billion war damages. The scars that remained among the people will last for decades, and we still see this problem. And therefore, the sooner we stop the hostilities and the sooner we reintegrate the Donbass part into Ukraine, it will be better for all.
Some say that what's happening now in the eastern part of Ukraine, it's actually originated in the tensions between NATO and Russia. Do you see this issue with the same eyes?
Well, the line of Moscow policy was, of course, to prevent the further expansion of NATO. We have seen that in the case of Georgia several years ago. We are also seeing it partly now with Ukraine, and this so-called near abroad of Russia is an important policy priority. But policy priority is one thing, and violating international law, occupying your neighboring country's territory and illegally annexing it through its own parliament is really contrary to all the principles of the global order which we have been building over the last 7 decades, not to mention the clear violation of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. I believe that Russia can have its right role in the international system, but clearly without territorial pretensions towards its neighbors.
And NATO and Ukraine, should Ukraine become one day member of NATO? It is good for solving such a conflict like this one in eastern Ukraine?
Well, first of all, membership of European Union or membership of NATO has to be a process that starts from the demandeur country. Every country has its sole, correct, responsible, genuine right to decide about its orientation, about its future. It is up to the Ukrainians to decide if they want to be part of the European Union, and I think that's very clearly what they said both at Euromaidan, both during the presidential elections as well as during the recent parliamentary elections. When it comes to NATO, we have seen lately the decision to abolish the non-aligned status and also to orient Ukraine towards the membership of NATO. It is indeed a process which can be politically managed and directed in a way which does not in any way endanger the interest of Ukraine's biggest neighbor.
Swedish Foreign Minister Mr. Carl Bildt has tweeted today, and I will quote, "Military developments on the ground and diplomatic talks in Berlin show Moscow's intent to consolidate and strengthen its bastion in Donbass." I will end the quotation here. As the chair of the EU-Ukrainian delegation, do you see the things in the same way?
Well, we are always concerned with the movements on the terrain which are aggravating the circumstances. You know that the European Union, and just as well, the European Parliament does not recognize the illegally held elections in the occupied parts of eastern Ukraine, which were held on the 2nd of November. What we would like to see is the process of full reintegration of these territories. This process would entail decentralization. This is a part of the President Poroshenko's plan for the constitutional reform. And here I think we could benefit very much from the expertise of the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe as a solid and credible international advisor of the best solutions for each formatted country in question. When it comes to the security concerns, we would also like to see the full respect of the Minsk agreement. That is something that is a priority for us. Whether international engagement goes through the Normandy format, where France and Germany are at the forefront, or through the Geneva talks format, where you have the European Union and the US as well on the table, this is for the key actors to see what format is best suited at a certain moment. I think we need a long-term and strong engagement of the key political actors, which will of course be fully taken account not only by Ukraine but also by Russia. This is crucial.
You've been intensively working in the process of the Croatian Euro integration as the chief of the Department of European Integration and the member of the negotiation team on the Treaty on Stability and Accession, among others. Mm-hmm. What were the biggest challenge Croatia had to face till this point to accession to being member of the European Union?
For us, also, it was a very long process. It took us more than 2 decades from our independence to membership, because we were independent on the 15th of January of 92 and joined on the 1st of July 2013. I spent half of my life, basically all of my professional work, dedicated to this topic. Indeed, the key challenges were the transformation of the society, of the values, adaptation.
The society and the values,
exactly.
Not legislative transformation, not
I would put
institutional transformation.
I would put an accent to values, because you need to remember that Croatia also was a country in transition. We were part of the, let's say, light East Bloc, the socialist version of non-aligned movement of Yugoslavia and the self-management system. So we faced the transition from a planned economy to the market economy, from one of the federative republics of former Yugoslavia to an independent state, from peace to war and again to peace. Not to mention the system of ownership, where we had so-called social ownership to the private ownership, so we had to adapt from a monopartite system to a pluralist democracy, and all of this in a span of few years. That's why I'm saying that the values were the most important: to embrace democracy, to embrace the rule of law, to embrace the protection of human rights. And then, of course, the big transformative exercise of harmonization of our legal system, as well as the reforms in all the sectors. I would underline, and this is equal for Ukraine, the importance of the rule of law. And that goes from the constitution to the electoral system to the, I would say, very widespread corruption, which exists also in Ukraine. It was a huge problem for my country as well, where we had to fight it with the legal means, with operational plans, but also with a change of mentality, because this is a phenomena which is almost like a metastasis to a young transition society, and it needs to be addressed with the strongest possible means. So if there is one advice, that is the strengthening of the rule of law in Ukraine.
And you are now in the situation to apply all this expertise within the Eastern Partnership countries on their accession to the EU. Is there a comparison? Is there a similarity?
Well, there are many similarities. Of course, the stabilization and association process, so the part for what was the leftovers after the enlargement which took place in 2004 and 2007, so the region of Southeast Europe from Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Albania, Macedonia, Kosovo, is of course different than the Eastern Partnership, because there is one important nuance, and that is the finalité of the process. Already for countries like Hungary or Slovenia, their agreements with the European Union were called Europe agreements. That means that the purpose of that association was to become a member of the European Union. Ours were called stabilization and association agreements. So the logic was first stabilize after the war, and then we will associate you to the European Union. The new generation of the association agreements signed for the Eastern Partnership countries also is important, because we are transforming this finalité close to the membership, but not on a very clear timeline. And that is one of the roles of the Parliamentary Association Committee, to help animate the debate within the Ukrainian society about the nature of the association agreement and about the European project as such, because I'm aware how different the enlargement mood and the enlargement context is today in the European Union, and therefore it is good to have realistic expectations for our friends in Kiev and other capitals of Eastern Partnership.
And on the other hand, those countries, those 6 countries, among which Moldova is the best student, they also have this delicate position between Russia and the EU. And speaking about Moldova, the best student, as I said, how do you see the fact that after 2 months, almost 2 months since the election, there is no coalition, there is no government? How would you define what's happening there regarding, when we keep in mind their strategic task to achieve European integration one day?
Well, just a word on the Eastern Partnership. We have 6 countries, but they are sort of divided in 2 groups, 3 each. Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, keen with the ratification of the association agreements to join the European Union, while Belarus, Azerbaijan and Armenia being on hold or slightly reorientating their priorities. So that requires a strong new reflection on the European side. And as you are aware, the EU, especially the Commission, the External Action Service, and the new DG Neighbourhood and Enlargement negotiations will be coming up with a proposal of the redefined Eastern Partnership policy as one of the two neighbourhoods policies of the European Union before the end of the year. We will have an important parliamentary meeting in March where we will discuss together with our colleagues these items. In that context, we recently had a ratification in this House of the Moldova's association agreement, and we very much supported it. We know that after the elections there is still a process of forming the coalition. Our advice was the same as for the Ukrainian partners, political parties there. Do the formation of the government in the most efficient way and create a stable coalition that can ensure the stable government directed to implement the reforms of the association agreement, because just as it was for us, the association agreement represents a tool for all the political, legal, sectorial, social, economic reforms in the country, and therefore the sooner the institutions are in place, the more adequate European Union support and response will be.
My last question, Mr. Plenković. I know that you are organizing these days an event on the role Otto von Habsburg has played for the Central European countries in their path to integration. And my question would be whether there is a Otto von Habsburg for the Eastern countries. And if it is, who would be?
Well, that's a bit of a far-fetched question. You, of course, know that Otto von Habsburg, besides being an archduke, he was also a member of the European Parliament, and he traveled in the last years of his life around the world with a Croatian passport, and he always showed a lot of affection, a lot of sympathy and support for Slovenia, for Hungary, for Croatia. And I was a stagiaire in this house in 1993 when he was still a member, and I remember talking to him. So these were the moments which were very important, where there weren't that many clearly thinking MEPs and saying yes, Croats as the other nations who were not in the position to have their own state and were on the wrong side of, let's say, of the curtain, have the right to join the European family. It would be very difficult for me to say, is there an equivalent for him for the countries of the Eastern Partnership? In my view, in the 21st century, what we need is a strong democracy and a strong engagement of the political leaders of those countries, and a lot of understanding and still open hands of the European Union towards the enlargement, so as to ensure modernization, stability, rule of law, and economic prosperity of those in Europe who, due to the history, were not on the right side. As John Paul II has said in this house in 1988, we should allow the other lung of Europe to breathe, and he anticipated the big process of the European reunification. I think that process is still ongoing, despite the fact that the dynamics, due to many circumstances, including the economic financial crisis, institutional crisis, Eurozone crisis, Schengen crisis, everything, Ukrainian crisis, terrorism, which we witnessed recently, will certainly, because of the migration issues and the delocalization and unemployment, etc., make the whole process of the enlargement far more complex and more demanding than it was before.
Mr. Plenković, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.